Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be with you all. Welcome to the August meeting of the Baltimore Vacancy Reinvestment Council. Just a reminder to everybody that these proceedings are subject to the Maryland Open Meetings Act. These sessions are recorded, public's invited to watch, and those members of the council and invited speakers are asked to participate. It's open to the press. They're in the room as well. Just want to transition really quickly to today's agenda. So from our June meeting, this meeting is continuing some of the conversations that we had, zooming in on particular neighborhoods. Today, we've got our partners from Southwest Partnership in the room, and we're going to talk about Holland's Market. And we're going to talk about how the city's advancing the neighborhood revitalization goals using BVRC and other tools and city resources. So we'll hear also more about year-end VBN abatement results, discussing the city's comprehensive demolition and stabilization pipeline in partnership with MSA, and get updates from our partners for action plan items that are underway. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Keene to drill down on the discussion from our last meeting about designing for place.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We'd like to have this agenda item at each of these meetings, designing for place. At the two meetings I've attended, talked about this interest in holistic neighborhood revitalization and what that means, and in our efforts, city around bringing alignment across all the city's resources and non-city resources towards outcomes that we can see and achieve over the next 3 to 5 years. I want to thank everybody at the city, including CA Faith Leach, everyone in the mayor's office, but especially the Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of Planning, who have been engaged with me since I arrived at DHCD and been incredibly patient and deeply helpful, trying to focus on this issue of place and achievable but aspiring development plan for the next 3 to 5 years. We are starting with Southwest Partnership just because we've been having a lot of discussions with them. Obviously, it's a hugely important part of the city, but we do propose to highlight different areas of the city at each of these meetings. Let's see, we can probably go to the next slide. Yeah, just to touch on this a little bit more. At the last meeting of this group, we touched on our role in building whole neighborhoods in partnership with many players who work passionately to rebuild blocks and restore quality of life for residents of the city. We know that behind our vacancy numbers are real neighborhoods with distinct characteristics, assets, and possibilities. As I said, today we'll focus on Holland's Market, but if you go to the next slide, just to touch on many other things that we're focusing on in addition to this enormously important and needed investment by the state of Maryland and the city's creative work around city resources in furtherance of addressing vacant housing. There are many other things that we must do. Things like addressing support to current homeowners, to do everything we can to ensure there's no displacement of people that are living in these places now, updated curbs, alleys, streets, beautiful and active public spaces, seniors, transportation choices, quality parks and recreation facilities, vibrant commercial corridors with upgrades and improvements to commercial facades and so forth, multifamily housing, reliable water and wastewater infrastructure, green energy and green infrastructure within our neighborhoods, all that we must do to improve water quality in the city. So all of these things are at the center of our work right now. I want to emphasize this in part because we have a lot of work to do to execute consistently and as rapidly as possible on state funding, the city's funding, specifically for housing. But we want this to be sustained, and we know we must act on the promise of the city, and that involves all of these things. And so next slide. This is just a reminder, this is 2015, I think it was, the vision plan that the Southwest Partnership produced, which has multiple neighborhoods within it, of course, but you can see West Baltimore Street there highlighted, which Tony Scott will speak to quite a bit just because of its importance. But if you go to the next slide, in our work around the BVRI request that we made to the state, we concentrated our request around this core of the neighborhood in Holland's Market. You see at the very center of this image, Holland's Market itself, which is an incredibly important public resource that the city is very committed to making a hub of the neighborhood once again. And then these other anchors, on the north you see Franklin Square, on the west Union Square, to the east on West Baltimore Street, the biopark that the University of Maryland has been working on so successfully. And then on the south, the area by the museum and Mount Clair Junction, I think the name of it is, which is, so you've got these anchors, you've got the market in the center, you've got West Baltimore Street. We really concentrated on this area. What we, of course, are committed to is that these investments produce something that everyone can see is moving the direction and the way the Southwest Partnership and those neighborhoods envision over the next 3 to 5 years. And that concentration and discipline around where we go first is so important to us. Next slide. I think I might introduce Tony Scott here, right? Tony, are you going to take us through the next few slides to describe to the council and to those here and watching online where your efforts are focused currently?
So first, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Tony Scott. I'm the Executive Director for Southwest Partnership. Can people online hear me okay? The
mics are good. Yeah, you feel free to join us.
So shameless plug, this is our organization. This is a little thing that you can take with you to learn more if you're interested. I've also included this over at the table there in case you are interested and don't know who we are. But this is because of the investment the state has been making in and also our foundation and private partners in our staff capacity. We actually can have like nice collateral to share about the neighborhood and promote. So thanks to Jakira, our marketing manager. I will also acknowledge that we have Nick Mayer present with us today. He is our Director of Real Estate Development. He is going to fill in the many gaps I may have and specific project level information in case folks have questions, and also maybe correct me if I say something off. So quick overview of Southwest Partnership. We are a coalition of neighborhood organizations and anchor institutions. We are community controlled, and that was very important from our founding and beginning. What we do to complement that is acknowledge that we don't have to be the experts in everything. We just have to be the conveners, the collaborators. We have a lot of access to existing nonprofits and developers and resources already in our neighborhoods and in Baltimore City. They're doing amazing work. We just need to coordinate and provide a platform for them to maximize their impact with their existing funds. And also figure out what the gaps are in services, in development, so that we can apply for burning. We can apply for different sources to help meet that gap. The range of things that we deal with in our vision plan range from workforce development to rehabbing commercial and housing projects. But again, we don't have to be the experts. And I think one of the things you'll see is our level of partnership with other organizations to realize these gains. One of the things to highlight here in terms of this presentation is that we have developed a comprehensive housing action plan with our community stakeholders, and that's about 2 years old right now. Perfect timing for BVRI, but it centers not just housing alone, but holistic development of the neighborhood. So, and not just whole block, but whole neighborhood. And so it continues and it evolves the building from strength approach from the block level to the neighborhood level, from the housing level to how do we support and retain existing residents as we're attracting new residents. And so just wanted to highlight some of that work today. Next slide, please. So our typical approach over the past many years has been passing through subsidy to other developers. And that's been thanks to the state through Bernie and through CORE, thanks to BDC and many other partners. What the opportunity we have now with BVRI is actually being in charge and leading and helping to better coordinate that investment in our neighborhoods with a strategic plan. The one thing we learned from developers is that they have their own agenda. Often they're buying properties where they think the market will bear or where, they have the most opportunity. But what we've been able to identify with, our community stakeholders and holistically is, where the existing assets are that neighbors and residents have been working on for years, where the city has been already investing, the state, et cetera, and building from that strength so that the private market can take over and eventually also be a partner in the development. We have over 800 BBNs in our neighborhoods, and those are the ones that the city has identified. Our housing action plan doesn't try to tackle them all. It says half of these, 400, if we can tackle half of these, which is still ambitious, we can catalyze the private market to be a partner. But we can't do that in a vacuum. We have to do it in a way that acknowledges and builds on existing market strengths and builds out the market block by block. And so that's been our strategy, our plan that we developed 2 years ago. BVRI has provided the platform for us to really begin to energize that plan. And so over the past year, we went from owning one property directly to now owning 14. Sorry, I get a little nervous now with the scale, the rapidness of it. But again, we've supported that with adding capacity to our staff. We also just hired a public space manager today to implement a lot of our public space work. And some of the things that you showed before in terms of our transformation of inner block parks and streetscaping, et cetera, has all been kind of like us figuring out how to do it together with existing staff on top of the other work. So because of your investment, because of Bernie, we've been able to expand our holistic approach and have dedicated staff to doing and managing well public and private resources. So next slide, please. Our whole block approach, this is on our first block. We've done things such as supporting string lights for the residents. There's a local business in the corner there who we're helping with their application to BDC for their window, but have been helping them over the years with facade improvements, et cetera. We've helped with, stump grinding, other things on that block to help existing residents feel like the VBN that we're addressing is not just about that one VBN, but about the block and the community writ large. You'll see there, we've also supported existing residents through Rebuilding Together Baltimore with legacy home repairs. And so, again, this is just part of a comprehensive approach, working with Build, working with our community organizers to really canvas areas, knock on doors, understand needs, and connect people to resources who already live in the neighborhood, has been part of a fundamental approach to stabilizing these blocks and inviting new residents, not just into a house, but into a community. Next slide, please. And so Collins Market, Baltimore Street, tying it all together, a lot of our BVRI investment has been around this corridor. To date, we've been investing in housing only. And you'll see on the next slide, don't go there yet, but you'll see on the next slide kind of the BVRI investments circling Collins Market, circling Baltimore Street. Baltimore Street is a mixed use corridor. So we have a pipeline of $19 million worth of projects just along Collins Market and Baltimore Street that are housing and commercial. But once you add the commercial element into these projects, the financing becomes more complicated. Trying to find the right businesses becomes more complicated. And it's a CHAP district, the historic, so there are additional costs to keep in mind as we try to preserve the historic fabric, as we're also trying to attract reinvestment to redevelop the property. And so, again, stabilizing this particular corridor has been our approach for the past decade in terms of managing a Main Street style program. We have someone similar to a community organizer who helps organize our businesses, knocks on doors, reaches out to property managers and owners, tries to deal with issues, quality of business issues such as dumping and other issues along the corridor to make sure that our current businesses and property owners feel valued, but also trying to attract new investment in the corridor when they know that there's someone there to help them navigate everything from when is trash day to how do I get a permit for this done and through the city? Am I missing information? How do I deal with CHAP? All these things are helped by having a soft hand, a warm hand to kind of handhold and help folks understand the context in which they're developing, and hopefully before they invest, but certainly during their investment, to ensure that we realize the gain from their investment. Next slide. So I know this is small on our end, but hopefully folks can see this. The blue dots there are anchors and community assets. Our first BVRI project is around number 3 there. We have another BVRI investor through MakeSpace over near number 1, and then Franklin Square and Bon Secours and the work they've been doing there with Greater Harvest and Build is around number 5. All these investments circle Baltimore Street. Okay? And Baltimore Street connects 4 of our 7 neighborhoods. And so really making a targeted investment that helps figure out and meet the gap that we're experiencing in that middle section will help not only sustain the gains, but also hopefully increase new investment into the area. Next slide, please. Yep. And this is just a more detailed, as was mentioned before with the commissioner, we've been already working with the city on identifying needs along this corridor. BDC has also been a partner in this with their commercial district assessment. We're looking forward to figuring out how we meet these gaps, how we do it in a strategic way. The public market is a huge investment in our neighborhood, and we look forward to helping stabilize that as well. But it really is an anchor from which to build for some of these other projects. Do I want to say anything else about this particular slide? I don't know, Nick, do you want to say anything about this particular slide?
So I will just say, kind of building off what Tony's talked about and what we heard from Commissioner Keene, our BVRI approach coming into the first year was to focus on our residential rehab work. And now that we're in a place where that pipeline is growing to 14 properties, we're trying to bring BVRI to that commercial corridor. And so when you see this slide, these are all projects that the Southwest Partnership is trying to support. Sometimes we've been able to support it with Project Restore or with Bernie. And some of these are in our FY27 application as commercial priority properties. The goal being really to move the corridor forward if we can. And so out of the 33 VBNs on our target blocks on West Baltimore Street and around the market, our goal would be to move 20% of those 7 VBNs forward in the next fiscal year. And we know what the gaps are on those projects. And so we're really excited to have this table and have these partnerships and be able to make connections from those developers and those owners two resources, two, the technical expertise to look at a pro forma and figure out what is the right balance of funding sources. Layering funding is not easy. We can bring the projects to you, but we'll need help from this team figuring out what the amounts are, what the sources are to get these projects done.
Thank you, Tony. Nick, appreciate it. This is exciting to see what you're working on. Such a great collection of neighborhoods here.
I think we have some questions.
Awesome. No, first a comment and a question. So I take a personal privilege. I love representing this area and working with Tony's guys at Southwest Partnership. You're doing some great work. You did a great a job in sort of laying out the framework. Let me also ask this, because I know it's in the outer years, so I'm glad we stopped on this slide. But we talk a little about the Lower Baltimore. I know that's been something you're working on for a number of years, and how that kind of fits into this overall piece, because I know it's a few years out.
It's great. I was just sending an email about that while I was sitting in the back. I was like, I need a commitment. Anyway, do you want to talk about Lower Baltimore, Nick, or do you want me to start?
Oh, I'll tee you up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think almost 10 years ago, the State Department of Housing supported the Southwest Partnership with Core Grant, which enabled them to do some intervention buying on West Baltimore Street on properties that were in the hands of speculators. And one of those properties was the historic Lower Baltimore Theater. And the partnership pursued an arts use for a number of years. And then after COVID, that was no longer a viable pathway forward. And so the focus has been on housing ever since then. The theater on its own is not a large enough site based on the technical feedback we've gotten to be viable as a housing development on its own. But combined with some city-owned lots and with an adjacent development partner's land, we could get that project up to 120 units or more. And so that's the pathway we're working on. But that's going to create, there's going to be land consolidation and entitlements. The water use on West Baltimore Street is going to be an open question. And so there's lots of opportunities for the city and the state to be partners. And we're at the very beginning where we are assembling the site. We've got a partner, we've got some of the elements here, but we need the technical support to take it the rest of the way. And there's a water replacement project going on the corridor right now. So it's the perfect time to figure out exactly how much water we need, how much water pressure we need to sprinkler a 120 unit building.
Which is important, because I know in some of the recent developments, there have been challenges in terms of water pressure. So glad you mentioned that too, in terms of infrastructure investment.
And I will say the city has already been on top of connecting us to DPW and beginning to have those conversations. So it's good to have this partnership.
I had a question about the kind of framing slides and also what's going on in Southwest Partnership around schools, because schools and strong schools were not part of the kind of like mix of how this we're defining. And Southwest Partnership is a gap. There was no 21st century school investment in the Southwest Partnership in the last round of funding for schools. And if we all remember, there was a surge of activity and people moving into the area in the early aughts, and many of them moved out because of the schools. And so when we're thinking about demand and we're thinking about designing this community, I think we have to think about what are the educational options for this neighborhood and this collection of neighborhoods, because it's not strong and there is no kind of unless I'm missing something, plan. And so I really want to make sure that, as we're thinking about a place-based approach, that education is anchored, because I think it is going to really be contingent for our deliver demand.
Yes. Oh, if I can start with that, and then folks want to jump in. Yes. So we do have an education committee. Again, from our vision plan, we created 6 or 7 committees that range the topics from workforce education, housing, commercial, historic preservation. There's another one I'm missing, and my board's gonna beat me up later. But those committees are of residents and of stakeholders. Southwest Partnership used to be in 3 of our schools as a, what's the name for it, lead agency. We've since reduced that work and handed off to other partners like Bon Secours or United Way, for example, et cetera. But we still maintain regular monthly meetings with the community school coordinators in those schools to figure out best ways to stay connected to families and how to support the schools and the principals. obviously, we're not experts in education, but we do like to keep a pulse on what's happening in the school and like the best ways to support. We do have a small like donation fund that we support with community events, schools for backpacks and those kind of things. But really, that is something that we do need to think more about and how do we support, especially when we've lost, I will say in Poppleton, 500 units of housing, which had a lot of children, and we're looking to put them back in 2 years. And so there's been the need to not only make sure the numbers, when we're talking about census and public resources, the numbers stay and the funding stays with some of our better performing schools like James McHenry, but also ensuring that the other public services are supported. And so the city has been very good with making sure that we have some of the recreational facilities. We have a new pool in Poppleton. We have a renovated rec center, for example, in spite of their loss in population currently, but the schools component, I agree, is extremely important to understand. We've closed 2 schools. There's 2
And 2 closures
two.
and no
new, right.
And there's been no 21st century school building at all in Southwest Partnership.
Some of our students have been moved to the one down the street, West.
Frederick Elementary, which is a 21st century school.
Yeah,
It's right outside the
It's
footprint.
outside of our, yeah.
Great.
Anyone else from the city want to weigh in on this? CAO lead, your councilman?
No, I'll just say,
School
as far as,
question?
one of the challenges we deal with, as you mentioned, Stewart Hill Academic Academy closing, and then thinking about the investment that's going to be needed also in Franklin Square. Because Franklin Square is one of those neighborhoods as well, and actually it's a pretty strong performing school. But I think, to your point, I think there needs to be some more attention to that.
I know organizing within Franklin Square, there's excitement about the partnerships and also the schools, and they want to do better. And we have partnerships with them. We're talking with parents. Both schools, I'm sitting there going Franklin Square and they had some immediate needs around traffic calming. I mean,
We've talked
you
about
first
that.
have to talk about
Calhoun
that.
affair.
You have to do their immediate needs around traffic calming and keeping their students safe. So we've been working on that, and the partnership is deepening. So I'm seeing those schools, I can see on the edge as we continue to organize it, those schools will.
And just to be very specific,
Improve.
when you're talking about some traffic calming, Fayette Street, we talked about Fayette and Calhoun and a number of accidents right across from Vivian T. Thomas, and again, just calming the speed that comes down.
Right. And they've been pretty active. The students have been pretty active in improving their neighborhood. There's just a whole level of involvement, engagement, which I'm sure will push the schools to be better performing.
And where we have seen the most growth across the city, particularly in the east and west parts, is pretty directly related to where we have had school investment. So, if we're talking about demand and we're talking about driving families back into Baltimore, then we have to be really explicit about the way that we think about school as that sort of demand asset.
Well, just an observation here that the planning and community engagement in Southwest Partnership is through and from Southwest Partnership is really mature, which is why we wanted to start here. But that, there's always more work to do. And so planning around schools is a great reminder to make sure that that's a part of the picture in every neighborhood. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Any other thoughts or questions for Tony or Nick? Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the
I
opportunity.
appreciate the deep dive.
Yeah.
Doing great work. Excellent.
Can I just finish
Yeah,
real
please.
quickly? This is such a good example for us to start with, in part because community and city back in 2015, and I showed that image, was this plan for these neighborhoods that are part of the Southwest. And for us to be building on that towards how do we execute on that plan? Very strategic with the community around where are those investments happening. The emphasis on West Baltimore Street, the opportunity around the market and so forth. It's exactly what we want to be doing, which is digging in at the neighborhood scale, as Tony said, around what exactly are we going to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years. What we want to do is make sure we replicate that in each area that we're concentrating BVRI funding in. So we'll continue with this in another part of the city next month. I do want to thank Ren Southard, who's here as our interim planning director, for kind of shifting the way her team and our team is working towards this kind of partnership with these communities. And it's much to do with whether we'll be successful or not. Thank you, Secretary.
Yeah, Tim, thank you so much for that. Totally agree. One closing thought as we transition, I just want to say, visit some of the new great stores on West Baltimore Street. Carrie and I were talking about the last time we were there this morning. I got my favorite hat at that. What's the name of that shop?
I don't
Where's Tony? You know the name of the shop on West Baltimore Street? There's like made in Baltimore.
Pat's Tea. He makes really great tea.
See,
I'm gonna learn this.
to help the small business here. I can't.
I'm trying to plug it, but
Coppin
you
State
can't.
hat. Anyway, we'll find the name before the end of the meeting.
Here, you put it on the official record.
Yes, we got to put it on the official record. Absolutely.
Yeah, look at that.
Speaking of this,
Before we transition from this, so one, I want to thank Tim and Ren and the entire team for just kind of reimagining how we do some of this work and really being focused on place and how we build place and community. And one of the things that we've been talking about, thinking about, and now are doing is looking at like our capital improvement program and being more intentional about if we are making investments in an area, whether it's through BVRI or whatever, or other funding, a rec center, that we're also then coupling things like resurfacing or repairing sidewalks, right? I was driving past Bocheck the other day, and it's a beautiful new rec center. It's gorgeous, or expanded rec center, and the roads are terrible outside of it. So, right, so we built this beautiful place, and then the infrastructure is still not in the space that it needs to be. And so we're trying to be intentional about some of the investments that we're making. So we're kind of doing this whole comprehensive investment in a neighborhood. And then similarly, one of the challenges that we get from Tony and other community leaders is around some of the, quality of life, like public safety challenges that will come to a head in the community. And so Sam from Johnson from our team has been working with another member of our team around what we call our multi-agency inspection task force, but we're trying to be a bit more place-based and place-focused, where we're bringing kind of those public safety, housing, all of those resources together to do interventions in communities. But again, very much focused on very specific communities where we are doing that deep engagement and deep investment. And so this work in Southwest Partnership, I think, is just the perfect example of how we're trying to shift how we do work in community. So thank you to him and the team for digging in on this. And Tony.
Well, so great to know that alignment is happening. Thank you for that update. That's not the only thing being updated. As we transition to the next slide, you are used to in these meetings us going through and Henry leading us through the dashboard. As we talked about in June, we're overhauling and updating that dashboard and the content. And so as we go piece by piece through that work and through that update, we'll be reintroducing it here in these conversations. The current dashboard is divided into the areas of vacant building inventory, demolition stabilization, code enforcement permits, acquisition, and disposition. And so as we, again, kind of update and review the status of the data, the status of the process and ground truthing that data, and ultimately redesigning and updating the dashboard itself, we'll be bringing that back here. And so Tim, Commissioner, I'm going to hand it over to you to dive in on some of those updates today.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to a topic that I raised at the last BVRC meeting, which has to do with the BVN abatements that occurred in fiscal year 26. So I'll start with this. So let me get oriented here. I'm not the best person to present data. I'll do my best. Bob Pippick has recently joined us. He would be much better at this, and I'm sure we'll be involved in answering questions.
We'll have Bob up soon.
So in June, we showed that how many and types of BVN abatements we had in fiscal year 26. Today, we'll show what happened to those BVNs. How was the city involved? What happened to those homes after they received their use and occupancy permit? Are they rented or owner occupied? Here are some headlines of these findings, and then I'll get into some details. First, the overall volume and total number of abatements and of those rehab abatements are the highest numbers in the last 5 years, and quite possibly a bit longer than that. So we've got a large number, the largest number of abatements and rehab abatements in that fiscal year. Had a large number. Secondly, those rehab abatements resulted in 170 blocks, which now have 0 BVNs. Next slide, which gets into some other headlines. Looking over time, roughly 30% of rehabs resulted in homeowners. The balance are rentals. The remainder are rentals, commercial uses, or in some cases, the data does not indicate use. Most rehabs took place in our most distressed communities, where, of course, there's most of the vacants, and almost 2/3 were in vacancy reduction priority geographies. Also, the median age of the VBNs faded. That is how long the building had VBN before being renovated, is 8.4 years. Next slide. Finally, we took a look at city involvement in the abatements. The city had some programmatic involvement in 28% of the rehab abatements. On average, the properties we, the city, somehow had involvement with or touched had been vacant longer, and the outcome was more likely to be a home loan. So in those cases where the city was involved, the vacant was probably had been vacant longer, and the result was more likely to be a homeowner. Next slide. So those are the headlines. Into the next slide. Before we dig into the numbers a little bit deeper, just to remind the council of some of the terminology, specifically the housing market typology. This is an analysis we've conducted every 3 years, which establishes market segments. They correspond largely to sales price value and include other factors as well. Just a useful tool as we understand that we need to tune our work to very local neighborhood level conditions, among other factors. So here you see the map that identifies the market typology. So the darker kind of bluish colors are the most advanced markets in terms of private activity that's occurring there. The grays are a little less active. The blues are the middle neighborhoods. The kind of tealish blues are middle neighborhoods. And then in the yellow and orange here is the neighborhoods where most of those VDNs were abated, and the neighborhoods most in distress. Next slide. First, we had a total of 1,620 abatements, of which 1,481 were rehabs, not demolitions. So on the left here, you see the top line is the total number of abatements. The line under that, yellow here, is the rehabs. And then at the bottom, you see the demolitions. This is on the left side of the screen here. So the rehabs were up noticeably while the number of demos has declined over time. And then you see that the rehabs were, most of those are in the middle markets, and in most cases, those blocks had only one vacant. I'm sorry. I'm on to another topic here. We had 170 blocks that were left with 0 vacants as a result of the rehabs. Most of those were in the middle markets. And in most cases, those blocks had only 1 vacant building to start with. Next slide. Over recent years, 30% or more of the rehab BVN abatements have resulted in home ownership. For fiscal year 26, it's a little too early to tell. Some of this data lags a little bit. Once a building is sold, with regard to whether it gets a rental license or recorded sales, that doesn't show up in the data quite this quickly. On the right, you can see the number of the number of rehabs that are owner occupied over time. So that's several fiscal years. And you can see it's above 30% each of those years. This on the far right is fiscal year 26, where we're still missing some data. We'll be tracking it. We would expect that number to get back up in that 30% range. You can see over time it's been similar, although in fiscal year 25 versus 24, there was a little bit of reduction in rehabs that went to home ownership. So we'll certainly be paying attention to that. Next slide. Looking at the housing market, not surprisingly, most of the abatements occur in the IJ, which is the most stressed in that map. Again, the orange and yellow areas, communities where most of the vacants are located, 60% within these areas last year, up slightly from previous years. Roughly 2/3 of the rehab abatements occurred in vacancy reduction priority geographies, which could be an indication that these zones are aligned with market momentum. Next slide. Rehab buildings had a BVN for a median of 8.4 years, as I said earlier, prior to being renovated in fiscal year 26. Properties that were vacant more than 20 years have gone up as a percentage of rehabs over the last 5 years. This, coupled with the uptick in rehabs in those most in need markets, may be an indicator that the development sector is working deeper into the available supply. Next slide. Not including demolitions, just rehabs, the city had programmatic involvement in at least 28% of the rehabs, with some involvement in 400 plus buildings. Not entirely sure how to interpret these figures given the scale of the private marketplace. But obviously we're working to increase volume and expect that this will happen. There are a range of ways in which we support redevelopment, including clearing title, TIF investments, our new TIF, other funding, homeowner and CDO level support. On the right here is just kind of when I say the city was somehow involved in 28%, this is the list of ways in which we could be involved. So, and our involvement could involve multiple of these items listed here. But 28%, you can see if you go back there for a minute that the city's involvement over the past fiscal years, what of those abated BVNs was the city involved? It's been up in that, been rising to up in that 30% realm. We were at 28% for the following, for fiscal year 26, so some consistency there. Although good news, the number of abatements overall have went up significantly in fiscal year 26. Next slide. On average, the city rehabs were of buildings that had been vacant longer and were more likely to result in home ownership. So on the left here, you see the number of years that the VBN had been vacant and the involvement, whether it was private sector on the left here. In the middle is the city's involvement and the number of years associated with that vacant building. And then on the right side, you see what of them resulted in owner occupancy. So again, private market on the left, city in the middle. So the city, in those cases where the city was involved, over 40% resulted in owner occupancy. And then just back to the headlines again, high volume of work in high need areas. Most of the rehabs are privately owned now and become rentals. Most of the rehabs are privately owned or rentals. The city is playing a significant role in the right way in terms of targeting and outcomes, and we expect this will accelerate. So that's the conclusion of those slides and that set of information, so we can get into discussion of it. But this is, you'll remember last month, we just presented a number, or 2 months ago in June, is that June? The number of abatements that we'd seen in fiscal year 26. That number is up slightly because we were able to update the data. We were at 1444. We reported this out in June. We're now at over 1,600. But you can see what we found in terms of how it breaks down detail. So with that, any questions or conversation?
I think I just want to say, the work that has gone into the dashboard and providing, consistent reporting of information based on the tools available and the data available and the pipeline for that data has been great and helpful. But this level of analysis, taking a deeper look at the existing conditions on the ground, the ultimate effect on the market, what is being produced. Where city dollars are producing that and state dollars are producing those effects. What the difference between what the private market invests in and what public subsidy is doing or causing is critical and necessary. And I think you were very careful, Commissioner, not to characterize, but if I can editorialize for a moment. Please and be less careful. My observations are simply that, for 28% of the outcome to be homeownership is not far off of homeownership in the city in general. Public subsidy should produce homeownership outcomes as much as possible. I think that number is something that we want to see increase. Number two, for a third, approximately a third of, and I think I'm actually inverting those two, but close together. For a third of the abatements to involve city or state resources feels like not an inappropriate target generally. We want to see the private market engaged in more than requires public subsidy, but public subsidy is going to be a piece of it. It obviously is, not just to lead, but because there are going to be places and projects where it won't make sense without it. So again, I think my assessment is that feels right. I think the 170 blocks achieving 0 vacants is great news. We want to see more of that. And I could go on, but let's open to any questions before we get to a deeper dive on demolition and stabilization. Any other questions or thoughts?
I actually think it may be helpful to have a separate conversation on interpreting all of this, because there's a lot of great new insights, but it'd be helpful to understand what's good, where can we actually move the needle on things, what should be some of the goals that we're setting as far as private investment. Yeah, so it's great, but I'd love to know more about what it means.
Well, and that feels timely, related to the work that you're leading.
Yeah,
that feels timely.
Well, I mean, for us too, I will just say thank you. All we want to know is every set of information that we possibly can that will help us direct public resources to the furthest end. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll just say, we were pleased to be able to present this information as an update from last meeting, but we got so much more to do. All we at this table and all we at the city want to do is know everything.
That's all.
And so really pleased that Bob's with us at this point, because we're going to be able to really get into, to your point, Mark, you know, how does this change the way we're working? To what degree? You know, how can we have a bigger impact? Let's just know everything and then be able to make smarter decisions about what we're emphasizing, you know? So, yeah.
So, I mean, a couple of things for me, and this is more observations and like general questions here that I think this data leads us to. One, I'd be interested to know, especially on the city side, for those that lead to home ownership, how much, you know, home ownership assistance or down payment assistance or other assistance programs were used, and, you know, from the city side. And, you know, on the private side, while the same may be available, are they accessing those home ownership resources whenever they're, you know, working with folks? Like, could that be potentially a driver? And then how much subsidy is needed, right, in order to get a homeowner in a home that we've renovated is a general question for us to look at and think about.
Sure.
The other thought,
who the buyers are.
yeah, and exactly who the buyers are. Are they new people that are coming into the city? Did they live in the neighborhood already and transition them from renter to homeowner, right? Like, there's some interesting, I think, data around like the buyers that could be the buyers and home ownership assistance that could be helpful. And it could be helpful in us thinking about, you know, if we're going to add more to our assistance program, what helps get people over the finish line.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of anecdotal data on that right now, but we need to have a better understanding.
Of course. The other thing that I've been thinking about, we had another meeting around like tax credits, and Annie Milley, who's in the room, brought this issue up around the cost, the average cost of renovating one of the BVRI properties, and it being over $200,000, for example. I think, and I don't know if folks know that number offhand, but when you think when we look at the private side and possibly doing that with no subsidy, it, you know, that to me seems to be the challenge. It just isn't worth it, quote unquote, on the private side to do that without subsidy, because you're just not going to see the returns. And so could that be a part of what we're seeing in the private market, is just the overall cost because of the condition of the vacants? But again, this is just observation, questions for us to think about and look at, like, you know, as we dig into this data.
Right, and I would appreciate the deeper dive, just looking at, we know what the city owns, but there are also other players and investors out there that we want to get into our pipeline in the neighborhoods that we're working in, so we can complete the whole block. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly or not so quickly that we're able to acquire these properties so that people can finish out the block. It's just those other investors that are holding tight.
And I'm going to put out another point, which may be, you know, sensitive. At right now, when we talk about demolition, we mostly are determining demolition based off of the condition of property. We have a lot of properties that are in very poor condition, but they are still stable enough for us to potentially renovate, right? It might be a tree inside, but they're extremely costly to renovate. Should we be having a conversation about whether or not we should demolish those properties once it gets to a certain threshold? Is a general question.
Yeah, it's a great segue,
right? But it's a very real question. If you're putting in $300,000 into a property that you can only sell for $225,000, again, these are things that I think we have to grapple with.
Well, CA Leach, that's perfect. Why don't we jump into the next section? So Commissioner and Gary, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a perfect introduction to this particular agenda item. The one message I wanted to deliver to the group is just the importance of our partnership and relationship with the Stadium Authority. And since our last BVRC meeting, a group of us got together, Gary, myself, and our teams to talk through our work together, and we'll be meeting regularly, to kind of go through progressions relative to how that work shows up for demolition and stabilization in the city. And, we have things to do with the city just to set the stage for this, which includes understanding the full universe of buildings we're talking about. We know when, we've gotten into demolition and stabilization as it relates to our BVRI submittals. We have emergency demolitions, of course, emergency stabilizations we do. But we really need a full inventory of what we're talking about within the city, which we're committed to providing. And then we've got to have, both the stadium authority and the city has to work through how we're going to execute on these consistently and predictably. So we're eager to better coordinate with the stadium authority, which knows how to do the work so well. And I wanted to get into a few things as to where we stand. So, you want to say any other introductory? Gary?
Well, I thought it was a great meeting we had last week. It's good that you understand what we have to deal with, and then you understand what you more execute with you.
Yeah. And just to stay on the topic that CA Leach raised regarding destabilization. So we currently have kind of 91 properties where we've got stabilization in process, and 13 of those are at the stadium authority to do some analysis of. Gary, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but they've got 13 that we've requested stabilization by the stadium. As I understand it right now, they're doing cost estimates on 4 of those 13 to get to your point, CA Leach, to determine what are we talking about here in terms of the costs associated with stabilization, with in part to give the stadium authority more visibility on, we're putting these out for bid, what should we be expecting in terms of costs associated with each, but also so we can discuss it relative to what's the scale of investment we're making. Decisions do we need to make as a city around prioritization of stabilization based on what the investment's going to be. Fair?
Yep. And the estimate is based on an engineer going into all 13 building full condition, and we should those 4 estimates early September.
You said score estimates in September?
Full estimates.
Full estimates in September.
For the four that they're focusing on right now. So
we picked the worst for the conditions just to get a baseline.
You get a baseline, okay.
And so, the stadium authority also has their procurement processes they've got to work through, as we all do. And some of the decisions we make around what are we going to stabilize and how are we going to go about stabilizing those buildings, because there's questions about that, will have to do with, the scopes of work on those procurements. And so we just have to recognize how each other has to work and just, dig into how can we support each other relative to acting on these things and acting on them consistently. So obviously that relates to demolition as well. We've currently got, I'm counting 46 on demolitions that we've sent to the stadium authority. We've got 30, 30 very close to also going to the stadium authority. And then we've got 26 that are medium ready to go to the stadium authority, and then 60 that we've got in development to move into that kind of pipeline into demolition. So So we're working on that side as well, but there's, to the CA's point, there's this, we've got to, at some point, make some decisions around what's the best use of our funding in furtherance of dealing with these buildings that we know can be incredible nuisances, and we have some limitations on what we can invest publicly in and what we can subsidize relative to where we are in the city with regard to the, you know, the market conditions for these buildings. So, Gary, anything else on demolitions?
So you're trying to come up with a priority list of how you would move forward in timelines? Is that the bottom line?
Well, I mean, we're on the city side, we're seeking to do better about what our priorities are. And
Okay.
we need to have the full universe of need here,
Need.
which we don't currently have, but we will get there. In the meantime, we've got, as I said, that was probably 150 or so demolitions at some stage of the process to go through the stadium authority. But Leslie, there's priority, and then there's how do we execute on it? And we have issues at the city with regard to our capacity to advance properties to the stadium authority to execute on. And the stadium authority is just working through their processes as well as to how they procure. And we just need to be in lockstep with each other around the realities we're both working in, you know. I'm really interested in, at the city, us being more realistic about the limited resources we have from a staff capacity to move these properties along, because it is a significant lift in staff time to provide, both on the stabilization and demolition side, properties to the stadium authority to execute on. And I feel right now that we haven't been super realistic about what it takes to produce on that side. And this is one thing that we've been talking about with CA Leach relative to what kind of shifts do we need to be thinking about in terms of our budget that gives us the capacity to move faster and bigger on these things. It's just, but we've got to be talking with the stadium authority constantly, because they've got their own realities around how they work with us and how they execute. So good news is they do a great job. It's just so much of the work is on our side to get them those properties. You know, I say sometimes, not to Gary, but they get the fun part. You know, you take the bulldozer out there. But we got to get the properties to a place where they can move, whether it's stabilization or demolition. There's a huge lift associated with that. And we just need to make sure we've got the resources dedicated to that work on the city side.
Gotcha. And so the Maryland Stadium Authority, are they the main player in demolition, or you have other smaller players to demolition?
They do the contracting of the smaller players.
Oh, you do the I got you. That's what I thought.
Which requires scale. You know, so opening that pipeline is critical.
Gotcha.
And I think the observation about the staff work that it takes to get to scale is an important thing for us to focus in on.
Is that lift regulatory? Like, we have created a Frankenstein of a regulatory framework that makes it difficult to move the properties from acquisition to demolition or stabilization? Or is it just the volume of properties and our ability to do the inspections, go out and see them, and then sort of qualify them for the pipeline?
It's not regulatory. It is. We have people with so many different jobs, and this is one of them. And we need people that this is their only job, is to do this. This has to do with very operational aspects of things. Yes.
Appreciate you sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, please, Matt, real quick.
I mean, the prior data presentation, which was very impressive, like you guys got down to the detail of there's 170 blocks where we did one rehab that kind of eliminated vacancy in the block. I mean, there's got to be like a corollary there for demolition in terms of whether it's assembling a whole block, whether it's enabling, you know, a CDO award that's already happened as like a demolition component. I mean, I'm sure we're going to get into the spending at some point, and I think everybody is just obviously concerned about the 25 and 26 allocations, but not having touched the demolition side. So, like, I think while we're doing the systemic fixes, which is great, and hopefully that'll happen as quickly as possible, there's some like low-hanging fruit that can be on the demolition side too, if they have a material impact on those. So if there's the equivalent of the one house in the middle of the block, we've got to kind of eliminate vacancy on the block, or if there's 5 or 10 significant projects that are demolition enabled in terms of the block, figure out how to prioritize those, get them on the state of the art sooner rather than later, while the systemic fixes.
Yep.
Even schools, big projects, which are in that
maybe
list.
But I mean, in the meeting that Mark hosted the other day, GBC, like, it wasn't real clear evidence of like a development pipeline that was being prioritized. There's got to be, I would think, between the awards and like what various agencies are working on. But if it's PDC, if it's city housing, state housing, what have already gotten awards, whether it's the schools that are in conversion, pick in the 10, 15, 20 most important projects that everybody agrees on. There's going to be demolition elements to those, and if they have 25 to 50 units associated with it, like, you should move them to the front of the line until the broader systemic work gets done.
Look, Gary, what's the sweet spot in terms of putting out a number of demolitions to bid? If we're talking about, for a moment, we're talking about single housing units.
Let me answer that 2 ways. The most important thing is a predictable pipeline so we can structure procurements. And if that gets to a big enough number, we can have on-call procurements where we can help the year if you're going to get X amount. So we get that bid in and we can execute right away. In terms of one-offs, 25 to 50 is a pretty good number.
To Matt's point about the deep dive from a data perspective and digging into what's the pipeline and those kinds of things, I feel like that would be a good topic for our next meeting, to show that kind of level of specificity around demolition and stabilizations, and in particular, and including the fact that Stadium Authority will have gotten these cost estimates back on the stabilization. So we'll have more information that supports decisions that we're making and how we're going to pick up speed. Because to your point, Matt, while we're working on the systemic changes, that doesn't mean we must not move forward the highest priorities to the largest scale that we can.
I do want to continue this conversation. I think next meeting we should continue that. In the meantime, I want to bring up Carrie, just watching the time, I want to bring up Assistant Secretary Carrie Snyder and Ira Cowler to talk about the CDO progress. Some of you may be aware that this is Ira's last day with MCIC. So he's leaving us and starts today working right here and continuing with us. Moving over, he'll be the director of Baltimore revitalization programs at Maryland DHCD. So he's not going far, but literally moving from the CDs to the CDs. So congratulations, Ira, and thank you. And Carrie, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
So one quick question, and Carrie, I think you might be able to help me answer this. So if I recall correctly, the city, as a part of the BVRI award, identified properties for demolition. Maybe what, 160? Was that big list?
160, yes.
Yeah. Now I think that there were some issues with that list, and it evolved over time, right? But like that is the universe of properties for demolition now that the team is like working through the process for BVRI funding. Okay. So I guess and you know, I'm happy to coordinate and talk to the team through this. What it sounds like is we might want a larger universe than the 160 because the Stadium Authority may need a larger universe than the 160 or
right.
the number that we make. Yes.
Yeah, ideally, the city would quantify the universe, and then the portion of that universe that's within the BVRI target areas that's eligible for state funding would be tranched out over multiple fiscal years, so we can just keep a flow of properties going over to MSA, because procurement, I think as we mentioned, is dependent on scale, but also on a consistent flow of properties to MSA.
Okay, so the question mark here is the denominator. We don't have, or we have not provided the city, the state a denominator of like, here is everything that is potentially could be demolished in the BVRI areas.
Yeah, or VRPGs would be the BVRI dollars. Yeah,
Got it.
all right, cool. So just quickly before we get into the CDO performance, this question recently came up. I think Beth, it was at the data working group about some terminology we use, target blocks versus whole blocks, because we talk a lot about target blocks when we do the CDO performance update. I just wanted to clarify those terms. When we say target blocks, those are the specific blocks that the CDOs are approved to work on with our BVRI funding. So within the neighborhoods of focus, they select a number of blocks. Sometimes if the neighborhood's very small, it could be the neighborhood, but often some of these neighborhoods are much larger, and if they have a lot of BBNs, the CDO identifies an area of that neighborhood to start working in to be more focused. That area, those set of blocks are target blocks. That's where our BVRI funding will support acquisition and rehab and other uses to get to use and occupancy permit and occupancy. Whole blocks is the outcome, right? We are trying to achieve whole blocks on those target blocks. Whole blocks means that every property on a block has a productive use. No more VBNs, and then other uses for things like vacant lots. So target blocks are kind of like the geographic catchment area. Whole blocks is the outcome. So just wanted to clarify those terms, and we can go to the next slide if there are no questions about that. And I'm going to let Ira update us on the dashboard and kind of where we are with collecting our CDO performance data, how we'll be reporting on it quarterly, and just some of kind of the highlights at the end of Q4.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Ira Kellner, still Chief Investment Officer at MCIC. Today, I'll figure out my later job title later this week. Just before I dig in, just a very brief moment of personal privilege. Just want to thank the entire team at MCIC, Michael, Crystal, Donnell. I think we've done a lot of great work over the past year. Really excited to see that continue as well and not going well. So yeah, a few just quick reminders here before we dig into the numbers. You saw a version of this dashboard at the last BVRC meeting. Just as a reminder, this is how we are going to be presenting the CDO and kind of neighborhood level performance data moving forward. You see, this is a screenshot. You see a few tabs at the top that will be kind of developed further as we get future feedback from BVRC and as we dig into some of the numbers. This is intended to kind of be the overall kind of performance view. We can then, again, this is just a screenshot, but on the actual dashboard, we can dig into neighborhoods, dig into CDO level performance. I'll also just kind of remind folks that the background for the data here is the quarterly coordination meetings that the city and state team have been doing a great job of organizing with the appropriate CDOs for each of the BVRI neighborhoods. So this data is updated on a quarterly basis. I believe kind of during our last meeting, we had like most of the quarterly meetings for Q4 at that point. We had kind of estimated some numbers. So what you see here on the final bar on the right here, the Q4, end of Q4 numbers, those are now updated to be exact, but you only see new bars for each quarter. So it won't be perfect alignment, with these meetings here. So just a few quick highlights of these numbers, just to talk about the line charts on the right. I suppose the best way to kind of understand these is that the blue and green colored bars are kind of properties that are now or have gone through the hands of our CDO partners. So the orange bar are kind of properties that are city owned to be disposed, to be handed off for development. The gray bar are properties that are privately held, VBNs that are privately held. That might mean a number of different things. Maybe a private actor is working to rehab them. Maybe they are private acquisition opportunities. Maybe they are future combination, etc. opportunities. And then those middle bars are properties for the blue, kind of indicate a version of site control. The green indicates a version of production or abatement. So as you see, those bars have gotten bigger, have gotten to be a bigger collection of our VBNs on our target blocks. So just very briefly, we have 46 new acquisitions, new site control that you see in Q4 of 2026. Those are a mixture of private market and kind of city dispositions to CDOs. About a little over 60% of those were private acquisitions, and that represents a full breadth of our CDOs. I believe 16 out of the 20 had a successful private market acquisition over the past quarter. 5 of them had a successful city disposition over the past quarter. And I'll just say briefly, I think that represents, I know that represents 17 acquisitions through city disposition out of our current pipeline of about 170 properties on target blocks that are kind of in the pipeline for city disposition to CDO. So making our way through that pipeline. On the abatement side of things, we've had 44 total abatements in FY26. And of those, actually 32 occurred in the past quarter. So we've seen a pretty substantial ramp up here in abatement numbers, which is great. I don't know if I'll make a super offhand projection about seeing that continue perfectly over preceding quarters here, but I think that's huge progress here and a testament to the work that all of the CDO partners have been doing in our neighborhoods. I do think we see a lot more abatements happening over the next few quarters, just based on prior site control numbers and the amount of properties that we know the CDOs are working through and are able to get into permits and get into production. And we've got a lot to go through today, so I think I'll pause there for any questions.
People pausing for questions. Okay. I appreciate the numbers. I'm wondering about lessons learned from your first year of developing the process and doing it, chewing gum at the same time, doing it, how you've evolved to this year, the money hitting the ground quicker, the CDOs using it, being able to draw quicker. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I think we haven't been providing the BVRI disbursement data up here, but I'll just briefly say, we've successfully committed the full $30 million from FY26. So I think that is a huge testament, not just to the MCIC team, but to the borrowers and the amount of work that they've leveraged up over the past year. And, their patience with us as we built up process and made sure that we were creating new processes that work both for the borrowers and for the state and for MCIC as we went through that. I think we're at, I want to say, 12 million of that actively dispersed in properties, which is great to see. And I think just based on the pipeline, you'll see this FY27 money move very quickly. I think we've seen a lot of site control work, as we talked about, over FY26. What that means is there's a lot more properties that now, if we can get the funding out the door, are ready to hit the ground running. I think the next question we'll all have to address, and that we've talked about a little bit here and talked about a little bit in some of the subcommittees, is kind of the capacity questions, right? Money's great, but if you've got, just one Nick, to pick on Nick for a second, right? How many houses can he manage? How many rehabs can he manage at a given time? How many GCs can he work with, right? I think as we get money out the door, that's kind of the next challenge for us all.
Right. I know the CDOs you have a variety of CDOs, and they're at different levels on how fast and how many houses they're doing. When do you anticipate the money hitting the ground this year? I know the first year we had a delay because you were developing processes and also meeting with the CDOs. Did you see the money hitting the ground
Yeah, I'll say now that FY26 is fully committed, MCIC is actively underwriting.
So it's
on
already hit the ground.
FY27
Okay.
money. We did all of our re-onboarding with borrowers over the past month here, so everyone is ready to go.
So your existing ones, and you just had to start with your new CDO.
Correct. That's what we'll get to in a few
So
minutes.
agreements with the new CDOs. Okay.
Are we going to have a similar or use the same framework for the TIF dollars also?
That's a great question. I don't know, Michael, you want to address that?
I think that this is a good framework, and we have the data on the TIF side to produce something similar. So we're already doing internal tracking, and I'll talk to the team, but I think it makes sense to kind of do a similar format.
Yeah, it'd be great if we could have it using the same sort of metadata consistency so that we can do comparables and make sure that we're not, that we're learning from both efforts.
Right. Learning from both.
Absolutely. Agree. Harry, you want to go to the next piece before? Did you have anything else to touch on before we transition? Okay, all right, great. Well, I know we were going to bring up a number of other guests on this section, touching on the Reinvest Baltimore Action Plan. We haven't done an update. I guess we had a little bit of time in June to touch on action plan implementation, but we've got more time scheduled today. So we'll hear from a number of partners, but Carrie, why don't you kick us off?
So just briefly, Ira and I are going to give an update on the FY27 BVRI round. We announced July 1 after our last meeting, so we just want to have a moment. If there are questions, we'll go through it briefly. And then for other folks in the room who are presenting after us, feel free to come up when Ira and I are done. Following us will be Crystal Okafor from MCIC on the BVRI Support Fund. So on the FY27 annual round, if you go to the next slide, David, thank you. So as a reminder, on July 1, we had a very exciting announcement of our FY27 BVRI awards that also included the launch of our interest rate reduction mortgage, which is called Reinvest Baltimore Rate Savings and new down payment assistance incentives. On the FY27 BVRI, we are working in the same neighborhoods as the FY26 portfolio. Leslie, to your point, for those existing CDOs, we're just moving like, it's business as usual. They have a set of target blocks and properties they're working on. They have funding from MCIC, and we just keep rolling. MCIC already has its first tranche of funding in hand from FY27, so there are no delays. There are two other categories. We had 3 existing CDOs where we approved an expansion to a neighborhood next door. NHS, Southeast CDC, and Rebuild Metro. They're performing in the neighborhoods where they were currently working. They had been working in those neighborhoods from some time and showing good results on acquisition and production. It made sense for them to move in the neighborhood next door where they already had been working for a while and had traction. So for those 3 groups, while they're continuing to do their existing work, we are building kind of the target block strategy for those new neighborhoods next door. And then we are now working in 3 additional neighborhoods with new CDOs. Those neighborhoods are Brooklyn, Broadway East, and Penn North. So what you see on the map on the screen, you can see in the dark blue, that's the outline of the vacancy reduction priority geography. Within that, in the light pink color and dark pink color are the BVRI neighborhoods. The darker color indicates those new neighborhood additions. And then the hatch mark is where the city has requested funding through their application for BVRI, which supports the existing CDO neighborhoods, but also includes some work the city will do over time to prime future neighborhoods for redevelopment. So that's the map. Any questions before we move to the next slide? Okay. Go to the next slide. I'm just going to, this is the list of CDOs. I won't go through it. It's in your material if you have questions about any of them. And then the third slide, David, thank you. I'll turn it over to Ira.
Sure. Just very briefly, talking about financing we are offering through BVRI. I think, Leslie, to your point, as we get into FY27, the products are evolving a little bit here. So, we've talked at length about the residential financing we are offering. I think maybe just one piece I'll add to that is at the moment we are doing fair amount of what we're calling like active phase funding, right? So funding maybe more than the subsidy at first, getting repaid upon sale. I think that's certainly a piece where the kind of private market partnership that we are working on is going to play a role as we see more demand for BVRI money and more borrowers. The homeownership incentives we launched in the middle of last year, and I will wait for the next portion of the action plan to hear further updates on that. And then I'll just lastly touch on, I think, one of the expansions we've talked about here in FY27, and you heard Tony and Nick mention this briefly for Southwest Partnership, is looking at how BVRI funding can also support commercial mixed-use investment in our BVRI neighborhoods.
Questions for us?
Kristen, you want to join us?
Thanks, Carrie and Ira. Welcome.
I must say, when Leslie asked for lessons learned, I had my game face on. I was like, oh, it's not my turn yet, but I'm excited to share. So, hi everyone. My name is Crystal Okafor. I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Maryland Community Investment Corporation. I'm here with my CEO, Michael Cornys, right there. And as you know, we are the fiscal intermediary for BVRI, which means that we co-designed and now implement the lending portion of this work. But it also means that we are the manager of the BVRI Support Fund, which is a $1.675 million flexible grant pool that is helping our borrowers get to and through the lending process. Next slide, please, David. Thank you. So that last part that I said, getting to and through the lending process, is critical because the focus of the BVRI Support Fund has really been what our philanthropic partners call capital enabling expenses. So we're focused on reviewing requests and approving requests from our borrowers around what is going to make their housing production transactions easier and faster. We have been grateful to have the support of 10 regional and national philanthropies in capitalizing this fund. Many of them are in the room. I would like to first thank Annie and Matt at Goldsecker, who really helped initiate this effort with us. We also have George from the Robert Joyce Foundation, Beth and Abel. It's been a remarkable partnership that I think all of our borrowers have benefited from. When we talk about the sort of grants that our borrowers needed, they really track with the life cycle of one of these single family acquisition rehab transactions. So borrowers requested support with acquisition. They wanted someone who could help them monitor the in-rem process, monitor the receivership process, someone who could help them find and negotiate with private owners. They're also thinking about their back office. So when your real estate development work ramps up, you need someone to help you keep track of receipts and invoices, do that bookkeeping for you. Our biggest area of request was around construction management. So folks wanted to both hire new staff, folks like Nick, again, who won't pick on, but then also contract with consultants like owners reps, people who can manage projects without actually joining the organization full time. We certainly receive requests too for marketing and sales. So the borrowers are looking for people to stage properties, people who could even stand up home buyers clubs in their neighborhoods to get the word out about the property we need to own. In terms of lessons learned, I think there were many, and I would welcome remarks at this time from Michael and Ira about theirs, but I would say that for me, the lessons learned are threefold. One, operating costs will always be commensurate with capital costs. So if you have this infusion of capital dollars, the borrower's overhead costs will necessarily increase, and there has to be some source that can meet the moment and help them address those operating costs. And we're grateful for the philanthropies who were able to step up in this instance. The second piece, echoing what Ira shared, is that FY26 was really a site control year for our borrowers. The measurable outcomes that we can see in our data are around how our borrowers were really pooling properties in order to form an investable pipeline of deals. And the last thing I'll share is that we learned a bit about the design of our loan instrument. So we were sure to put a 15% developer fee in our loan agreement. That was one of Michael's innovations. And we thought that this would be sufficient liquidity to keep our borrowers afloat as they were ramping up in their real estate production. However, we did learn that over the course of the year, many of our borrowers did not get to access that fee, either because they were pulling the properties, so focusing on acquisition, or they ended up deferring the developer fee because there were gaps in projects that they wanted to fill. And some were just working at a smaller scale. So smaller volume of projects means less developer fee, less liquidity for this work. So those are the lessons learned that are top of mind for me. On my next slide, David, please. Thank you. I'll just share before I close that we have around a $200,000 reserve that we're using for urgent requests for our borrowers until September of this year, when we'll be able to recapitalize the fund with, again, with the support of this cadre of foundations who are in our circle. But with that reserve, we are thinking through what are some cohort-wide supports that can, again, help our borrowers make their transactions easier and faster. So one of which is an intervention with Live Baltimore, which we're in the initial stages of planning. The second is our bi-monthly convening series. We have brought the Neighborhood Design Center on board to help us plan and facilitate a convening series that will have our borrowers skilling up based on the best of the sector. So they're learning with and from each other about critical aspects of how you do the single family acquisition rehab work. On August 28th, for instance, we're having our second session. This one is on private acquisition. So a number of the borrowers will be on a panel talking through their strategies for identifying, negotiating with private owners. And then from there, we'll do sessions on marketing and sales. We'll talk about liaising with city agencies responsible for public safety and greening and code enforcement to ensure that these neighborhoods that we're investing in are places of dignity. And then we'll close out with a session around growing your organization, because if the real estate work is growing, the organization itself has to have the back office to sustain that sort of production focus. I will stop.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part?
Yes.
You were talking about like a community of dignity. You're coordinating with whom?
Yes. So we, during our convening series, we're going to have a session on how we can liaise with city agencies that are responsible for aspects of neighborhood quality of life, such as code enforcement, greening, public safety. So we've got to begin planning that session. Once we do, I'm sure you'll be looped into that work. But our hope is that our borrowers are solely responsible and funded and financed to do the housing piece. We know that as we're inviting newcomers to buy homes in blocks where investment has lagged due to structural forces for decades, that just investing in housing is not enough to make a neighborhood with meaningful amenities, a neighborhood that's a place of dignity. So we want to think through how we can coordinate that full-fledged suite of investments that are needed for a high-quality neighborhood, and that's going to be the focus of one of our convening sessions.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to partner closer.
Thank you so much for talking about the organizational development, because that's really key. Again, think about that operational support, the support for staff, because as organizations are taking on more, they need to have that capability.
I think one of the lessons learned that I often hear from Ira and our loan program manager, John Alberry, is that working with the borrowers one-on-one on a daily basis can be a part of capacity building too. Some of our borrowers have never liaised with a lender, not even a CDFI type lender like BCL or NIF. So we're really taking them through even our streamlined underwriting process, and BVRI is an underwriting process that is allowing them to learn this is how you access capital when it's not merely being granted to you, but when some modicum of repayment is expected. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunity here to really scale up the sector, again, based on what already is good and right within the sector.
I think getting back to Faith's point, I think it would also be good to know that, like, if borrower participation in some of the support services is leading to more home ownership, that would be something that I'd be interested in understanding. And also for the TIF properties, if they also are eligible for some of the supports, and if they're taking advantage of it, and if they have the same kind of TA, I think that those are things that would be good to understand and measure over time.
I do think broadening the access to those homeowner incentives and borrower support beyond just BVRI funded work is critical.
Right.
That's the only way we're going to expand that, those outcomes.
Correct.
So what level of support, like, you know, for, I'm sure it was different for each.
Oh, certainly. I think for the demand for the resources was high. So we did
The demand for?
the resources. So we raised 1.675 million. At the end of we did 2 funding rounds, one in the fall, one in the spring, and we had a reserve of around $200,000. So folks were eager to get their hands on these resources. I think the most common use of the funds was construction management, project management. Some of our CDO borrowers are self-performing. So for an organization like MakeSpace, Trish, she wanted to earn a salary for doing this work. So of course we were happy to pay her in doing that. But then there are folks who are skilled developers, know how to produce a unit. I don't want to pick on anyone, but someone like Victor Ekanabi, we didn't hear from Victor until the end of the fiscal year when with his the large volume of properties he was working on, it was clear that he needed support with accounting. So we were able to make him a small award to do that. So the grant sizes range from as small as 10,000 to someone like Victor for accounting support to as large for Trish. It was around that 80,000 mark. So she could pay her salary for a full year. And we were also certain to scale the awards based on the size of borrowers' approved property list. So if someone was working on less than 10 homes, they weren't going to receive the same amount of support as someone who's working on 40 homes, etc. So that's how I would characterize.
So did other people ask, other CDOs ask for any type of different staff support or anything like that?
Yes, so the staff support varied. I think most wanted someone who could be their boots on the ground overseeing the construction piece. But there were others who wanted to bring on staff part-time to help with grants management. And so Yolanda Hobbs has been working with CBT and CHI on this. And there's also folks who are looking for community engagement support in order to have that pipeline of home buyers at the ready as units were being produced.
So, you know, I'm reminded that when we decided to expand eligibility to CDOs in last fiscal year, you know, the idea was expand the number of soldiers on the ground, you know, in the Army. But this is a reminder that you got to train and equip those soldiers. And so really grateful to MCIC, grateful to our philanthropic partners for leading on this work. I want to thank you, Crystal, so much. I want to bring up Justin Williams, Baltimore City's Director of Permitting and Development Services next. Welcome, Justin.
Welcome, Mr. Chair, Secretary. I guess the slides were shortened since I last saw the draft, so I think the time was supposed to be very brief on this one. I guess the top line thing for this body to take away is that we have a dashboard, a public-facing one, and an internal one for permits. You need to back it up first. I mean, the problem that you heard about in the news and that caused me to be in this position a year ago was that our permit system launched without assignments working automatically or even being done correctly. It wasn't automatic. So if somebody had to go to planning because they needed an urban renewal plan review, go to planning, might go to the planning director because of his division. And so a lot of that work had to be done to pull stuff out, fix the assignments, and make it manual. So the intervention we did early on, since last September, with BVR, I funded projects was to keep a list based on the properties that we were given, that were funded, and have a list that would have myself, one of my permanent liaisons, eyes on it once a week to check and make sure nothing's falling through the cracks. There's a lot of things were just falling through the cracks. We've since fixed that. And so even across the board, since September 2025 when this launched, so prior to 2025 for the BVRI permits that came through the door, the average review was 38 days. Then since September, the average review now is 14 days. And so that's pretty swift. And so like, I think it's fair to say for building permits to get a vacant home renovated shell condition, it's working smoothly. The bigger pain point, which is I've talked about for years from my private practice background, is like the other stuff, the DOT work for right-of-way permit or DPW utility connection. I was out with my Councilman Bullock and sweating last summer with the water issue, trying to get the water pressure out in Southwest Baltimore with the same problem. So like that's been the focus for me citywide. And then I've been working with the Bacon's team housing to help solidify the processes for vacant coming online. How do we get the water pressure? How do we even have a process by which developers can ask about the water meter being in the ground or not? And if there's no pressure, because that changes the scope of work and the estimate and cost. The other just key takeaway is, generally just as a top line number, if there's any media to report this good news since July 2025, the median residential permit was 28 days. Now it's 2 days. So we had a big drop last month. Thank you. But so, which is great. As Commissioner Keenan and I have talked about, the issue right now is that that's only for residential permits.
I thought that was an obvious applause line.
It's residential permits, but it covers the gamut for many residential permits. It could be a residential permit for an electrical switch outlet or a new construction row home. And so the focus
That's the median, Justin?
Correct. So any residential permit, but the way we track and publish the data internally and externally is residential or commercial, which most of you would recognize. If not even a builder, you need some more granularity to have planning. So you know what is it like to get a new construction permit for a ground up construction townhome versus a vacant shell, and all the things that go into that. So that's the next phase of the work, is getting that stuff working. But short term, for all the BVRI funded properties, as long as we get the list going, I know there's been lots of discussion with MCIC about getting the data on the block and lots to us so we can keep the list that areas, the permits that are involved with blocks and lots. But generally, it's the case that it's not a permit issue. And so I've talked to other people in the room about funders who hear from people still that there's a permit issue, and people do exaggerate, misrepresent, or lie. And so that's the one problem we have. And so part of it is, though, even the developers don't know because the contractor might be misrepresenting. And so having more public facing data for the developer is also important to me so that everyone sees the same data on the press.
So, go ahead.
Just real quick. So Justin, one of the things that I think was on the slides was just CDOs will be, that are receiving BVRI funds, for example, will be, I don't want to say prioritized, but will be communicated with on where their projects are at in the application status. And that's come up. That's come up a number of times in these meetings and in other conversations around just ensuring that that in the landscape of permitting, that not just those BVRI funded CDOs, but funded development partners, anyone working in these particular in the VRPGs, these areas that we're concentrated to invest in, that they have some level of attention to make sure they're accelerating through a process. I mean, great that the median is down, the processes are faster generally for everybody, of course, but just want to make sure that those are still sort of front of mind.
Absolutely. So there are periodic meetings with the Bacon's team and the CDOs. I joined one with Southeast CDC last week to flag things as I hear from the Bacon's team, which makes sense to me. Is the problem is less about the building permits, about the other stuff that goes into getting development approval. So the utility connection and that process, which is sort of my thesis when this role I thought about from prior practice. My background as a land use attorney was that there's no single point of person in the city government whose job is to think about all the things that have to happen, because it's not just housing that deals with getting a house entitled and occupied. It needs water pressure and utilities connections. And so working with DPW and DOT is a key part. And so like my role, I see it as being citywide, but being the liaison short term with the CDOs and the vacants team internally to help communication paths go into the formal process and getting better guides. Because the other part is like last part, I've been sort of surprised when the community hasn't known the process. So, or maybe they've made the jump from doing vacant shells, which are fairly simple, just pull a permit, versus like new construction requires most sediment control, stormwater management, things that they hadn't thought about. So when they told to do that, the developer was surprised, despite having lots of experience, because they just didn't know about the process. So having clearer guides and training is sort of, I think, a big step.
So it sounds like the question I had is that given that you have the bigger picture, you're sorting the permit request to be able to move them faster through wherever they need to go.
I think the way for the BVRI funded ones, it is sort of just only a matter of just making sure someone's on it. So that the issue we had last year was that things were getting dropped, things were getting assigned to the wrong person, they were assigned to the wrong division. So like, and then we had issues with divisions couldn't be held by multiple people. So Caitlin Audette in planning is a chap reviewer and a design reviewer. So if it went to her in the design review bucket, but she needs the chat thing, it wouldn't go to her correctly. And so lots of those kind of minutia that cause permits get stuck.
Oh, to get it to the right person.
Right. So yeah. So the big intervention last September was just get the list of BVRI funded ones and every permit, but especially BVRI ones. Hey, what's going on with them? Or does someone have that assignment to do something with it? We've fixed that across the board. So not just BVRI, but all permits for the building permit. But there's, again, the need to identify and help the applicant out. So at the front end, if they're applying for new construction on a greenfield site, they should be flagged and said, hey, by the way, you're going to need to do stormwater and erosion sediment control and water meter, and you need electrical review, and you need to get a letter from BG&E in the front end, and all things that need to happen.
Justin, thank you. I want to bring up now Ben Glover from Healthy Neighborhoods and Dan Ellis from NHS to come forward, and we're going to talk about homeownership.
So good. Am I first or you first?
Your size first.
Just for the notes, I am joined today by Sandy Mitchell, who is our senior lending manager. So she's here to keep me honest and to make sure that if you have any technical questions about borrower level, she's the one who knows that and can answer that. So a quick introduction. So I am Dan Ellis. I'm the CEO of Neighborhood Housing Services of Baltimore. We're a 52-year-old organization. We are one of the community-based organizations that's working with BVRI, so thank you, and have received support funds. So I just want to say thank you all for your hard work. We are appreciative. We are also a community development financial institution, and we've deployed since we started doing down payment assistance about 12 years ago, we've deployed over $20 million of funding, and we're awarded through MCIC funding to support BVRI awardees. So I would make a note, having run a lot of down payment assistance programs, the Reinvest Baltimore down payment program is the most flexible funding we've had. So I just want to note that it was designed that way intentionally. It has no income requirements. It has no repayment requirements if the homeowner stays in the home for 5 years. And it has no requirement that it be for first-time home buyers. So there's also some other flexibility that's built in, but those are really noteworthy to make sure that people are able to access the properties. So a couple of notes on the early data. If you can see the next slide, please. We've seen about 17 loans either closed or committed. So we have some early preliminary data. The funding will support about 150 home down payment assistance programs in this first tranche. So we've seen about 10% of it either committed or deployed, which is pretty good since we announced it publicly on July 1st. And so we're really proud of the early results. What we have seen is that you're asking about who's new to Baltimore. We've seen 47%, about half, of the home buyers are new to the city. So they were not a city resident and they're coming into Baltimore. The other 53% were residents in the city moving within the city. So that's
another obvious.
We also are seeing 88% were first-time home buyers, which is something I think we're interested in. Again, not a requirement, but something that we are seeing is happening. We saw most of our home buyers early on came through referrals from the BVRI developers, which makes sense because early on, before it was even publicly announced, that's who was aware of the program. But we're beginning to see interest come from some of the counseling agencies and people coming through the counseling programs, sending people, letting them know about not only the down payment, but the Healthy Neighborhoods program that Ben's going to talk about in a minute, and being able to layer that together and the financial benefit of doing that. So we're starting to see that. We're seeing people are going out to look specifically for BVRI properties. And because it was just recently announced, we're just starting to see that pipeline come to fruition. So we're expecting more momentum in that as we go forward. And so we're really excited about the progress so far. We're deeply appreciative to the team for the support of it. And I'll hand it over to Ben for Healthy Neighborhoods.
So Ben Glover, the Director of Capital Programs at Healthy Neighborhoods. Usually I wouldn't envy speaking this late in the slate of presenters, but I got something really excited to talk about. Basically our 3.5% interest rate loan. For context, we're probably in about a 6.5% interest rate environment, right? So there's not a marginal improvement on the interest rate, it's a big improvement. And basically what this is, the Reinvest Baltimore Rate Savings Program. It is basically this interest rate that I just talked about, the 3.5%. It's fixed over the 30 years of the loan. And what we do is that we basically buy down the interest rate using grant proceeds from the state in order to achieve that below market level. The borrower doesn't really see the sausage making of that. They're just seeing the 3.5%, so it's super easy on their end. Additionally, we honor the Healthy Neighborhoods usual terms of no private mortgage insurance and just 3% down payment. So collectively, this is very, very compelling product. And in terms of eligibility, really, you're just looking at the formerly vacant, newly rehabbed homes that are in these BVRI awardee neighborhoods. And one point of clarification is that you have to get the loan through Healthy Neighborhoods. It's not like we're providing grant proceeds for another lender. We are the bank, we are the lender, so it has to go through each time. Next slide. So this is the money slide here. On the right-hand side, you're gonna see that 3.5% interest rate I talked about and the no PMI. For a $250,000 home, that's a monthly mortgage fee of around $1,100. If you were going to walk into your local bank and get a conventional loan, you're going to look at something like 6.5%. You can pay some level of PMI. That's going to be closer to $1,700 a month mortgage fee. So monthly savings alone, $600 a month, which is straight arithmetic from there. Over the course of a 30-year loan, that's $215,000. That's literally almost as much as the purchase price itself. So on this slide, you really get to see,
But also everyone, we should be pushing at, can we do an analysis of the renters in the community and just go door to door and say, if you're already paying, even in subsidized rentals, $1,000 a month, you can be a homeowner. I mean, that's the thing.
That's the thesis, absolutely.
Yeah,
churches too, and
well, I'm
really advertised.
I was actually even thinking city employees. As we were thinking
all the live
about
where you work. We should we should go to every single Hopkins employee that's living.
But this is the rate buy down program is limited, right? It's as far as the number of people.
Well, it's in the same way that it's limited that we're kind of talking about the same areas. Basically, anyone who's going to qualify for the 3.5% interest rate loan also qualify for vacancy value and also Dan's down payment assistance grant. So the math that I'm showing doesn't even include the $30,000 down payment assistance grants that we're referring to. It's even better than the math.
And if we can bundle them with where you work, then you end up in a much stronger. It's a no-brainer.
It is.
So,
and we can generate wealth.
So if you add, what Healthy Neighborhoods and NHS have on the table here, I think the other key takeaway here, just zoom out for a minute, is how much of the appropriated funds shift from demolition and stabilization work to rehab work to incentives for home buyers over time. So we need to actively monitor this and continue to potentially tilt that from year to year. And I think over time those incentives probably grow, and the rehab work requires potentially less. So that's maybe a hopeful analysis of and an oversimplification, but I know the demand is going to be incredibly high for these programs.
I think we're ready for it.
Yeah, and just to finish things off, I'll talk through our brief progress. It's similar to what Dan was just talking about. We're around 20 of these awards have been either awarded or actually 6 of them have been formally delivered. So like the settlement. The average cost of these, the grant on our end is about $18,000. So with the amount of funding we have, that's around 70 or 75 homes that we support. And it's a, you know, I think it's a big overlap to what you're seeing with, again, if you're qualifying for our program, basically qualifying for Dan's program too. So cross-pollination is really powerful. And then I would say we've also seen a significant acceleration since the formal launch on July 1st. We're now averaging about 2 or 3 ratified contracts. And then I think the last slide of this here, go one more. Actually, it looks like they cut one of the slides, but the one thing they did was, there we go. There we go. The one thing I did want to call out is that, you know, as this program was launching, part of the friction is that, like, you're 3.5% share, they're like, that's phenomenal. They're like, well, what homes can I buy, right? And when you have like 15 or 20 different developers, you don't want to be just sending them, you know, it's just a very inefficient way to do it. So the obvious, you know, solution was pulling together some public-facing, you know, full list of the homes that are in market, which, by the way, are kind of changing day to day, week to week as homes sell, new homes come to market. The Healthy Neighborhoods website is that current repository. That's where we've been sending people. If you go to our link, you'll see just that current list of properties. Again, it's around 30 or 40 properties today. And, you know, we being, along with Dan's organization, being kind of at this like unique kind of center point of seeing the flow, we just thought we were kind of the logical party to kind of put that together. And that was like the kind of one of the missing links. But now it's a really powerful, we're seeing like tons of volume of people like going to our website and kind of following through with follow-up calls through our organization as well. But I encourage people, if you know anyone who's interested in this program, go to healthyneighbors.org, click on properties for sale, and use it.
Ben, Dan, thank you. Thank you all so much.
Really great work.
So one thing I failed to do, oh, thank you. You actually moved the slide. I was so excited to get into the content of today's meeting that I forgot to ask for a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June's meeting. So can somebody do that? Can I get a motion?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, please signify your support by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So in closing, I just want to say this. I think it's important that we understand where we are. We are certainly in no place to be claiming victory. That is not my intent when I applaud great work. But I want to acknowledge that, you know, whether it's GBC and Enterprise, whether it's MCIC, whether it's our partners at NHS and Healthy Neighborhoods, whether it's MSA and MCIC, you know, quasi-state entities, multiple parts of Baltimore City government and Baltimore City government as a whole. There's a lot of great work happening, and it is aligned, and people are communicating, and people are moving in partnership. So thank you. And with that,
Next meeting?
next meeting is in October, I believe.
Yes, October 19th, I believe.
October
It's in your
19th.
notes.
Okay.
We'll put out public notice of that, and we will make sure everyone has that date following this meeting. That's right. And working groups are still doing great work and meeting. Thank you so much for the working leadership, and thank you all. Have a good day.